But let's go to Lamentations. Let's just go all the way to chapter 3. I could talk about the other poems. They're all beautiful. But here's the lesson tonight. From the 3rd chapter, let's look at what God expects from us when our whole life hurts. Have you ever been to a point where everything hurts in your life? I mean, you don't even want to think. You don't even want to go out. It just, everything hurts. And it's just like you just want to go to sleep and hope when you wake up it's all better. That's what's going on in Lamentations 3. And what we see, starting in the beginning of this 3rd chapter, are a listing of the biblical afflictions God uses and manages and allows. And most of all, the hurts that God says, these are ones I can handle. And I'm so glad, as we go down through all these verses, I'm so glad that Jeremiah opened up his life and told us these things. Because you know what, we would have thought, man, what a great life he had. He was called by God, had a famous dad, he had this lifelong ministry in the capital of God's city, Jerusalem. He must have had a great life. And if he had not pulled back the veil of privacy and actually shared what was going on inside. Now, I was talking with one of the elders, and he said that someone came up to them and said that this elder was teaching in a flock or one of the life groups, and they mentioned a little struggle they had at work, just briefly, just a little struggle with something. And the person came up and they said, thanks for sharing that. Because I would have thought you had a perfect life with no problems if you hadn't shared that. Did you know Jeremiah could have let us just read all the good things, and he could have looked like he had a perfect life, but he had a lot of problems, and they start in verse 4. And he covers what we would call the entire spectrum of all the afflictions and troubles God allows to come our way so He can be the closest to us. And here they are in order. This is what Jeremiah faced starting in verse 4. Number 1, he had the hurts of broken physical health. You know, all that beating and dungeon and mud and stocks and the stress of being stalked and spied on affected him. And look what he says in verse 4. He has aged my flesh and my skin and broken my bones. In other words, he said, everything hurts. He said, my health is gone. So, if you've ever had broken physical health, Jeremiah's been through that. Secondly, look at verse 5. He said, I have the hurts of deep, not only physical pain, I have deep emotional pain. That's what he says. He, this is the Lord, by the way, is the He in all this. The Lord, who is sovereign and omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent. The Lord, who could stop all this, didn't. And so Jeremiah said, since you're all-powerful, you are the one that is allowing all this to happen. So I'm speaking to you. And in verse 5 he says, He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and woe. He says, hey, you're the one that allowed me to be conceived. You granted conception. You called me when I was still in my mother's womb. You put me into this high priest family. You put me into the most famous Bible discoverer in the land. And you put a lifelong call in my life that I was your man. And then you don't let me have a wife. And you make me be single. And you make me, even among my own religious family, priestly family, they hate me. He says, you know what, Lord? You have allowed me to feel the hurts of deep emotional strain. You've surrounded me and besieged me. The idea, remember, a siege is when you're inside the city and they tighten the circle and they put up all these walls so you can't get out and they're trying to starve you and make you die of thirst. And you just are trapped in there. He says, Lord, I'm surrounded by what you've asked me to do with all this emotional trouble. And it doesn't stop there. Look at verse 6. He says, I'm suffering periods of dark depression. Lamentations 3:6. He has set me in dark places like the dead of long ago. Aren't you glad he said all this? I mean, you ever felt bad? Do you ever feel like you're in dark places? That's a classic description of depression. You just feel like you're in a dark place. You just feel so detached, so distant, so burdened. The dark places like the dead of long ago. You know what the dead of long ago? They're forgotten. You know, after that circle, if you think about how quickly we're forgotten, how few people are really remembered from the past. And he says, I am in a dark place. No one cares about me. There's no comfort in life. Verse 7, he says, the hurts of desperation and the burden of being trapped is what I face all the time. He has hedged me in, so I can't get out. Do you ever feel trapped? Trapped in your job, trapped in a relationship, trapped in finances, trapped with your physical health? He says, man, I feel, in his words here, I feel hedged in. I can't get out. He has made my chain heavy. Even if I could get out, I'm chained down. So, he had this desperation. He felt trapped. In verse 8, he says, all this is going on, and I feel out of touch, distant from God, and left behind. You ever feel left behind? Everybody you knew, they're off, they've got this and that, and they're enjoying everything, and you're not. You're just stuck right there, chained. Look what he says in verse 8. He said, even when I cry and shout, He shuts out my prayer. Now, God didn't. This is written down. It's under the inspiration of God's Word. We're reading it. This is forever going to be settled in heaven. This is part of the Word of God. But in that moment, He felt. You understand? These are His feelings. Verse 7, I feel hedged. I feel chained at the end of verse 7. I feel that when I cry and shout, you're not listening to me. Can an omnipresent God not hear something? No, He knew that. But He's being honest about how He felt. He continues to go on to say He felt frustrated and confused in verse 9. He says, He has blocked my way with hewn stone. Now the picture here is, have you ever seen the pyramids in Egypt? There were the secret entrances to those. And after the secret entrances were used, there was a block with a kickstone, and it would drop down and completely seal that entrance. And that stone coming in, that, as it says in verse 9, that hewn stone blocking the way was one of the most effective security measures to keep treasures. You just drop those blocks into those chambers and it would completely cut off. You were surrounded by stone and that block was immovable. So what he said is, you have put an immovable block in front of me. And when I'm not in that chamber locked in, you have made my paths crooked. He says it's like I can never get any traction in life. My pathway is just meandering. It seems like I'm going all the time, never getting anywhere. Verse 17. And we could just go on. This is an amazing chapter, this 22-verse poem, to read through the first part of it. But he says in verse 17, look at this expression, how he felt anxiety and sadness. He said, you have moved my soul far from peace. Peace, shalom, means to be made complete. He said, I'm far from complete. Peace means the absence of restlessness and anxiety and trouble. He says, I'm far from that. And then he goes on at the end of verse 17. He says, I have forgotten prosperity. It's been so long since I was enjoying life, I don't even remember ever enjoying life. The hurts of anxiety and sadness. Verse 18. The hurts of physical weakness and hopelessness. He says in verse 18, my strength and my hope have perished from the Lord. He says, my physical weakness and my emotional hopelessness, I don't even have any hope you're going to rescue me. So he's really down. He's really hitting bottom. And here's his last word. In verse 19, he says, I am facing the hurts of bitter affliction and aimlessness. Verse 19, remember my affliction and my roaming. And then he says, the wormwood and the gall. The wormwood was an external poison. The gall was an inward, overflowing poison. And he says, inwardly I feel poison from the inside. Outwardly I feel like life is poisoning me. And my affliction and my roaming. He says, I just am not getting anywhere in life. Well, those 9 verses describe some of the deepest woes, some of the greatest struggles, some of the most intense trials that are imaginable. And if you have known any or all of them, then you're in good company. Because that's what Jeremiah faced all at once and completely alone. Remember, early on, his family rejected him. And he didn't have a partner for life. So what God did is, it's kind of like what loneliness is all about. And always remember this. Loneliness is when God takes everyone and everything out of my life, so only He is closest to me. Now, we don't usually think of it that way. That's a little positive way to think about it. We like to stew and think, oh, woe is me. But loneliness is actually when God removes every other human and every other comfort so He can be the closest. And that's what He's doing with Jeremiah here in these 9 verses. God caused all this, and what Jeremiah says next is so vital. In verse 22, Jeremiah shares the cure he found and what kept him from being destroyed by the immensity of the sorrows. He shares with us what I like to call his prescription from the great physician. You see, the one who was with him when everyone else was out of his life. The one who was accompanying him as his partner and friend when everyone else appeared to be gone. The great physician was with him, and he changes. See, the poem ends, the 22nd verse is the last verse of this poem, of all these horrors. And look what he says as the blessing. What possible blessing could ever come from this horrible poem of all the conditions of affliction and all the hurt? If you end with this 22nd verse, you understand what God was doing. This is what he says in verse 22. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed. I mean, it would be easy to be consumed by verse 17. His soul is far from peace. He's forgotten prosperity. His strength and hope, verse 18, have gone. He's feeling affliction, verse 19. And he feels poison outside and poison inside. It would be easy to just get consumed. But look what he says at the end of verse 22, the very end of this poem. This is what our faithful God offers. Because His compassions fail not. Now, you know what I've written in my Bible. I'm a Bible writer. And whenever I think about sadness and dark times and my soul being far from peace and, any of these that you might resonate with, I always go back to Jeremiah 3. So when hard times are coming, and you can feel them coming, you open to Jeremiah 3, and I have written down first, all these horrible things, the broken physical health, the deep emotional strain, the depression, the trap, the burden, the out of touch, frustrated, confused, fearful, poisoned, anxious, sad, all that stuff. But then, verse 22, the tide changes. And I would encourage you, if you're a note taker, to jot these somewhere, meditate on them, because you are going to know someone that's going through dark, God feeling far away, or you're going to go through it. Maybe not now. Maybe it takes a few years. Maybe, health or job or family, something will happen.